Thanks, everyone. This is the Backup and Recovery Office Hours for April 2023. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm joined by Kyle Olme. We're going to talk today about, first I'm going to do a demo of the recovery service metrics and the information that the recovery service sends into OCI that gives you an idea of, what's happening with your backups and how and you can compare that to the SLAs that you have in your organization. And I'm going to do that live, so we'll switch over to the console to do that. And then Kyle is going to talk about the Oracle solution discovery journey, where Oracle can help you, discover the solution that is right for you based on your requirements. And then we'll talk a little bit about TCO around that so that you understand, based on your requirements, what the total cost of ownership looks like in the comparison to potential other solutions in that same space. So let's go ahead and I'm going to get started with, I'm going to go dive straight into the console. If you've seen previous Ask Tom sessions, I talk about, our functionality that is now under database backups. So you can see that, we have databases that are being protected in this case. So this is my database. And these are some of the statistics around the database. And in this particular case, I picked a database that doesn't have real-time protection enabled. And I did that on purpose because that shows you, a fluctuation in this data loss exposure. If real-time protection is enabled in steady state, it just stays at 0 seconds. And I wanted this fluctuation so I can show you how alarms work, how the metrics graphing works. And you can watch this fluctuation because by default, the base database service, which is what we're using here, the base database service only protects the archive redo logs of the database every hour. So you'll see this fluctuation up and down of, logs building up. There's no protection. Then the archive redo log gets protected, which brings the data loss exposure back down, and then it builds up again. So you'll see this kind of fluctuation, and I'll show you what that looks like. But you can see we're using the base database here. It'll be the same for Exadata. All these views are exactly the same for the Exadata database service, but we're using the base database service for this demo. And just kind of to review back through some of the details that come forward with the recovery service. I'm in the console of the database service, and you can see some statistics about what's happening in this environment, right? We know the database is protected. We were just on that previous screen in the recovery service console to see that. But just from the database service, we can see my data loss exposure is 5 minutes on this database right now. I had a failed backup on April 8th. So we show the last failed backup for the entire day range that's in the protection policy. So once this goes past the 24 days, it'll disappear off the last failed backup list. But I did have a backup that failed back on April 8th. I forced a backup failure by taking the database offline. And then it shows my last completed backup, which was last night. And it shows my next scheduled backup. So you can see that information as well as the space used. So if we go down here to the bottom, you can quickly see I've got a lot of successes, but there's that failed backup that happened back on April 8th. So you get information about that directly in the console. And like I say, after this goes outside this 24-day window, it'll disappear. And then there won't be a failed backup listed, but I'll force another one just to keep my dashboard interesting for demos like this. If we go over to the autonomous recovery server, just to kind of recap a little bit, you see a lot of the same information. You see my current recovery window is 25 days. My protection policy is set to 24. So it's going to bounce up and down above 24 days. And you'll notice that my projected space utilization based on this 24-day policy is slightly lower than current because we're going to purge down some of these database backups that are sitting in the recovery service because they're not needed all of them are not needed for the 24 days. So you'll see the purging go down and it'll come back up and up and down and up and down. Again, as new backups come in and old ones are purged out. There's my database size, which is about 4 gigs or so. And this is the link back to my database. Same failed backups and completed backups. And, we also keep track of the backup duration, which is, from an operational perspective, very important for you to keep track of, to understand how long your backups are taking on a regular basis. And we'll be developing a chart so you can see this over time. But right now we show the last backup duration just so you can keep track of it. And then, as I mentioned, this is the link back to the database, and this is my database version. This database is 1918, so it is eligible for real-time protection. But again, I have that turned off so that we can see this fluctuation in data loss exposure as the scheduled job picks up archived redo logs. And all of this data is sent to the Metrics Explorer, and that's really what I want to talk about today. So the Metrics Explorer is gathering this data that is being sent, and the one I'm going to look at is data loss exposure. So if we go over here to the Metrics Explorer, right here under Observability and Management, go look at our Metrics Explorer. I'm going to look at it for the last 7 days. And then I'm going to tell it I want to look at, this is the compartment that my database lives in. And I'm going to pick the recovery service metric namespace. And then here you can see there's data loss exposure. So now if I go to data loss exposure, I'll turn it up to every 30 minutes so we get a nice smooth graph instead of a bumpy one. And then I'll update. Well, actually, I'm going to look at a specific database in that too. So we'll look at, this is the database. I did have a previous database in there that was from the last office hours, but it's been cleaned up. So I'll just look at this database. So if we do that, see, there's my data loss exposure. So you can see it's up and down like a sawtooth. As I mentioned, the archived redo logs are backed up once an hour. So you can see that it grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks over time. So that's over the last 7 days. You can see this up and down motion. And with this, I can also set an alarm. So, the databases that are in this compartment, let's say, aren't using real-time protection. So I can set an alarm to watch this value to make sure that if the value is exceeded, an alarm is sent, because that tells me that something's wrong. Like my database is not being protected in the way that I've specified, right? I'm expecting that at least once an hour, I'm going to get a backup. So my data loss exposure should never go much over an hour, like maybe a minute or so over an hour as we're processing the redo log. That could happen. But you can see that it should stay right about an hour. We got a few little bumps up there as the redo log, this one went 40 seconds over. So you'll get a few little bumps, but I shouldn't see anything much past that. So I've got an alarm that's configured, and this is my data loss exposure to high alarm. And we can look at that, and I'm monitoring the databases that are in that compartment. And I've got it set at 4,500, so it gives it a few minutes past the hour to make sure that the archive log backup completed and inside the time frame that I want, and we don't get a false positive. And then if I scroll down here at the bottom, again, let's look at the last 7 days. So you can see this is the data that's coming back from the metrics for this database. And I had artificially set it low to set off the alarm. So you can see every red line, every vertical red line in this graph shows the moments where the alarm went off. So I can see again, a historical view of the database, and I can see if an alarm went off and when. And of course, my alarm sends an email to me, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But let's go look and see how I've got that set up. So we'll edit the alarm. So I've got an alarm name, obviously. I've set the criticality of the alarm. So it's either critical, error, warning, or info. So you could set that, based on your alarm criteria, what you want that to look like. Again, I'm monitoring this whole compartment. You could also monitor a specific database. It's got the same concept of monitoring a specific database down here. And I'm looking at data loss exposure, and I'm checking it every 15 minutes. I'm looking at the data loss exposure to understand what's happening on a 15-minute interval. Again, you could adjust that, and you might want to adjust that for real-time redo. So if you have real-time protection turned on for the database, you can turn this interval down because it's gonna, it should be 0 seconds all the time. And where in my particular case, because we don't have real-time protection turned on, the backups are only going to run once an hour. So, querying more often than every 15 minutes or so is kind of a waste because I know the backups are only going to run once an hour. Then if I scroll down, there's my trigger. So if it goes over 4,500, it will show, it will send an alert to me. And then I have a topic set up, and this is the topic where that I'm storing in our backup and recovery product management compartment, and the topic sends the email notification out. So that's where you configure the email notification. So if we create a topic here, you'll see there's the spot where you can put in an email notification. There are also other subscription protocols that you can put in place. Email is the most convenient for me, and I'll show you what the email looks like. But you fill in the topic name and the information for the email that I'm going to send out, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then you have information about what frequency this should happen, how the alarm should be reset. Let's scroll back up, and let's go back to the alarm. So as I mentioned, the alarm got set off. Oops, if we go back to the last 7 days, the alarm's been set off a few times just so I could get notifications. And if we look at that, what happens, this is what the alarm looks like. So you can see this is the alarm. This is the data loss exposure too high, which is the name that I gave it. And it's sending an email to me. That's, of course, that came to my email address. And it tells me that it's triggering because it's greater than 3,600 seconds because I turned it down to get the alarm to fire. And there's the database name that is impacted by the alarm. So I know where to go find that. That's the database unique name. And it uses the database unique name because you could have multiple databases in the console. So if we go back and look at the console here, and we look at our databases, look at our database backups. This friendly name could exist for multiple databases. So we get down to the database unique name, which is unique inside the infrastructure. So you see there's the same database unique name that's showing up in the console. We don't want to just use the common name because that could be difficult to find. And we also, of course, include the OSID of the database in the alarm as well. So this is the OSID. So you could search for the specific OSID so you know exactly what it is. So you have two ways to search here, by the database unique name, which is a friendly name, and then this is the unique ID in OCI for the database. And then this is the alarm. So if you're trying to figure out okay, where I got this message, it's firing. I don't know where the definition is. This is actually the definition for the alarm. So if we search for this, we'll end up at the alarm that we just looked at. And then, of course, it's got a link so you can view the alarm directly in the console. It'll take you straight to the console that we're looking at here. Oh, over here. Oh, actually, let's do this while we got a moment. So I will take the OSID of the alarm and we'll search for it so you can see how that works. So if we go up here to the top to the search for resources, paste it. There's my data loss exposure too high alarm, which is right back where we were earlier. So you know exactly which alarm was set off. The other thing you can do, I've got this. Let's see if it should. Let's click edit again. Edit alarm. I pointed out that the alarm itself. Let's wait for it to pick up. So I'm going to show it in this section. Yeah. So the alarm itself is in this compartment, BRPM. So that means another thing that I can do, and this happens everywhere in OCI. You want separation of duty. You don't want the DBA necessarily to have access to, the operational DBA. You might want to keep your policies in a separate compartment where that DBA can't modify the policies. And you can do the same thing with the alarm. So I can put the alarm in a compartment that the DBA, the operational DBA, doesn't have access to. So that means the alarm can be monitoring the databases that the operational DBA is in charge of administering, but they don't have access to the alarm. The alarm can sit in another location that they can't modify, and it can monitor the location where the databases live. So that's another way to have a separation of duty, so to make sure that no one modifies your alarm to keep it from setting off while they're doing something malicious. So think about that as well when you're designing your compartments, keeping that separation of duty from your alarms to your policies, and then your databases, keeping all that separate. Okay, so we looked at the alarm, and you've seen what that looks like. The other thing that we will be covering, and I want to just kind of preview this now, there is a cost management aspect of OCI where you can do cost analysis. I was going to do that today, but the cost analysis information is not coming into my tenancy properly. There's a big gap. So we're going to do that next time, and where we'll go through these same metrics, where we can see the metrics information that's coming in for the operational aspect of the service. We can also go through a cost analysis set of metrics that'll show you exactly what costs are associated with which databases, and interesting ways you can use tags. And also, on that topic of tags, we'll loop back around as well and talk about tags and overall management inside the cloud, because, and I'll just to give you a preview, if we look at the database real quick, and we look at the tags for the database, so you can add tags to this database to define different things. Maybe this database belongs to a project, maybe it belongs to a specific user or department. You can put tags in, and then on both the metrics and the cost analysis side, you can query based on the tags. So that means you can gather groups of resources, even if they don't exist in the same compartment, via the tag, and look at that. So we'll dig into that next time and go through this tags and cost analysis, just so you have an idea of how to look at that in your infrastructure. Because some customers have a requirement to look at cost analysis by department or by project. So tags are an easy way to define that structure so that you can understand your costs. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint here real quick. Okay, so this is the alarm example that we went through. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about competitive. We're going to look at competitive two different ways. There's public service providers, Amazon, Google, Azure, in comparison to Oracle. They've designed a generic platform that is supposed to run everything under the sun. We know that it doesn't work well for databases all the time. Obviously, we've developed a section of our offerings for database specific operations to get you the best performance. They also rely a lot on snapshots for backups, which, we, as the backup and recovery solutions group. We've got some blogs and stuff that talk about how that's not really the best the best way to do backups, because a snapshot lives with your database, even if you're copying it off. There's still some nuances there that you got to be very careful with. A corruption can propagate through multiple snapshots because they're interdependent of each other. And it's difficult to do checking on the snapshots. So you can get yourself in a very interesting bind when it's time to do recovery. So you want to make sure that you understand what your recoverability looks like. So basically some of the stuff that we were just looking at, your data loss exposure, and then the recovery service itself is doing checks behind the scenes to make sure that recoverability can actually happen. And from a DR, you've got to plan outside of that. It's beyond just snapshots, right? If you're going to talk about true disaster recovery, making sure that all the stack and the infrastructure is ready for an actual DR, and that's a little beyond snapshots. And then finally, the third-party service providers, they use a lot of third-party ISV tools to try to fill in these gaps. And especially with the Oracle database, we've got all this native functionality that's built into the service itself. As we were just looking, like backups are built in. All the information about backups are being directly displayed in the console. It's a very rich set of information. And then we have the metrics that you can report on behind the scenes to make sure operationally you're in good shape. And then talking about third-party ISVs, again, generic backup solutions, they're trying to treat a database like any other file. And then they're tying into these third parties to do for cloud, where we're putting cloud, the same technology that you see in the cloud is available on premises. We're making sure that journey works through your entire life cycle, whether you're on premise, you're hybrid, you're in the cloud, you're using the same technology. The recovery service that we talked about today is based on the recovery appliance that's available on premises. So that's an example. The Exadata database service that runs in the cloud is based on the Exadata engineered system that you can run on premises. So, there's this flow and easy way to get from both on premises and the cloud with the Oracle solutions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. He's going to talk a little bit about this journey and how we can help you understand your requirements through, technical business value and then implementation. So Kyle, I'll turn it over to you now.
Perfect. Thanks, Kelly. So, I've got a little bit different way of looking at it, I guess, a little bit. And I think, this has been a pretty fun journey for us to see and to watch. I spend a lot of time, working with customers and we get to kind of see some of their questions that they have, along this journey. And I think, fundamentally what we're really talking about here is protecting the crown jewels, right? And there's no other way of doing it. In our eyes, until you start really looking at what the recoverability is and really focusing in on that. So we've got kind of this journey and this process that we tend to leverage when we get engaged with a customer, and I wanted to kind of share that today. And again, this is really focused on, taking the things that we've learned over the years, because fundamentally that still exists, right? So the need for recoverability, the need for RPO, RTO, all that stuff was defined from an enterprise perspective over the years. From the business. And in the grand scheme of things here, we're talking about, again, the crown jewels of everything. Your company does not exist without data. There is no way to download, double click and reinstall your data. Your data's gone. Your business is over, right? So I think it's often overlooked when we start doing some of these comparisons between what was running currently on premises with a customer, and then, moving that over into cloud. I think for whatever reason, we've overlooked a couple things, in this journey. And that's really, fundamentally a part of what we want to do, from an Oracle perspective, in helping our customers. So we tend to start this with kind of some workshops and demos. So going over again what Kelly just kind of showed, but a little bit more of a one-on-one answering those questions, showing you how this works. What are you doing today? How does this change? That's kind of our first step of just kind of the educational side of making sure that this is a good fit up front. Again, designing around what your recovery points are, making sure that that fits into your business, and kind of moving that forward. We've got a really rich set of tools that we use to leverage this. We kind of consider this part of our technical fit. Um, I would certainly invite you, this is certainly something we can do fairly easily. We take basically the RMAN catalog that's running on your current on-prem environment today, or we can look at what's being deployed in OCI. And we could do some comparisons to see, what your recovery times are. Are you meeting your requirements? What's the sizing that it takes? So this gives us a lot of really good information. We'll look at things like change rate and so on to systematically, scientifically look at this opposed to just estimating what a size might be. I can tell you that when we start doing some of the sizing, you start looking at the overall TCO and ROI, which is kind of the next step to this process. Backup is a big part of cost, right? So when we look at some of these things, and depending on, if we look at like an on-prem environment where customers are taking weekly fulls, daily incrementals, again, they're typically doing that because of the recoverability needs to be quick. That's fundamentally different with the recovery service here, which is really nice. But that can get really expensive. You get basically 5 full backups, right? And incrementals on top of that. We see some really kind of goofy things along the way, every once in a while too. Some of the competitors, 1 full backup, up to 30 days of incremental. That can take forever to do a restore. Right. So those are the things that we want to kind of, look at as we go through this, from both the technical fit and also the business value side of that to make sure that this is really a good fit and for you to really understand what that cost and that cost savings and the risk reduction is. And then, lastly in this journey, quote unquote journey is, we're standing, side by side with you as you go through and do your implementation, with this and rolling it over. There are some things, and we as a team spend quite a bit of time helping customers understand, as I mentioned, you're doing this on-prem today this way. What changes when we do it within OCI or cloud, right? So there are some pieces fundamentally that are different there. We follow MAA as our guiding principles all the way throughout. All of our products, including the service, is built with that in mind, I think, which is it's a big star out there when you look at, we've developed the Oracle database. We've got the best practices, for protecting that database. We've got the systems built from the ground up. This is fundamentally different. And with that brings a lot more value, around this, both in a technical fit and also the business value. So, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. This is just kind of an output. A little bit here, some of the work that we've done. I think this is kind of an interesting one. AWS is obviously, often kind of a conversation point for us. This is doing a comparison between what it looks like to run the recovery service opposed to, just running on AWS from a recovery standpoint. So just right out of the gate, if we look at the blue and you look at the gray here, so this is the RDS backup compared to the recovery service. They're both the same cost. But again, fundamentally, when you think about it, you've got 1 full backup, all of these incrementals, a restore point that is full, right? And again, that's what we're really concerned about when we think about backup is what does my recoverability look like? Right. And we should be testing that. We've got a customer, that we've been doing some work with that actually just mentioned that they're a big recovery appliance customer, but they, prior to recovery appliance, they had 3 full-time employees just doing, basically validation, right? To make sure that their backups are going to come up. So, that's built into this product. Again, just right off the bat. So if you do those comparisons, there's a ton of value here. And then if we do the comparison on top of that to the ZDL or the zero data loss portion of this. Again, it's cheaper than the EBS backup, and snapshots are good. Don't get me wrong, but I would look at snapshots for an application server. Fundamentally, we think of it as completely different from the database. Again, it makes sense to have something specifically designed to protect your, your business. Because in the end, as I was mentioning, without your data, it's a bad day. So just, kind of an interesting way to look at it anyway, where the cost really kind of comes in on this. And it's true, right? So, I mean, we'd be happy to sit down and kind of go over this with you. Again, we take, your data directly from the RMAN catalog, see what that looks like, where the efficiencies come in, and then we can map it into, where your TCO and your compares look like here. So this makes a big difference. It really does. When you look at the total cost of ownership of picking up your database and moving it over and running it into a cloud, you have to think about ingest costs. You have to think about backup. You have to think about, hey, the business expected a recovery like this before. Can we still do this? Right? All those things fit into this, true architecture where you think about it like that from a best practices perspective. And then there are certainly some things that we could do now. Come in, give this a try. We're certainly here to help you. We can spend some time one-on-one to go through this. Reach out to your Oracle sales team. We've been more than happy to get involved and get some of our backup and recovery experts to answer some questions around this. But the great thing about cloud, as we all know, is you can get your hands on it right now. Kick the tires, if you will, a little bit on that, run some backups, play around with it. You're really not committed to a whole lot. In the end, you can basically, continue to move forward or basically turn it off and that's it. So it's pretty easy to get, adequated with it and be able to kind of really see where the value is with this. And then I did mention there too, within your Oracle team, feel free to reach out to your Oracle sales teams. There are specialists, there are folks involved, ready to jump in and look at what you're currently doing today. Maybe you've got some challenges that you're trying to overcome. Maybe you want to keep everything, the same of what you're doing. We've got, again, as I was mentioning, some nice workshops that we can sit down and walk through with you. Some of it's self-paced. If you'd like to learn that way as well, we can point you in the right direction. Talk about some of the best practices. Again, we live and breathe and bleed this day by day. So this is what we do. Be able to show you kind of what that sizing looks like as you continue to move forward. And then again, obviously all this comes down to does it make, business sense to do it? So, looking at that cost analysis in there as well. Reach out to your sales teams. We're more than happy to get involved here and help out the best that we can. Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Kyle. Yeah, as Kyle mentioned, you can use the recovery service today. There's not a huge commitment for a huge amount of space. You only get charged for the amount of space that you use, and we're talking about cents per gigabyte. So take a look. It's really easy to enable. And you can go through all these testing scenarios and cover some of the stuff that we've talked about in past Ask Tom and office hours sessions. You can go and try it out yourself. Well, we encourage that. And then, of course, come to the next session and ask your questions. If you're seeing, something that you didn't expect or you want to talk about or ask questions about your experience, we're here. We look forward to hearing from you and have send us suggestions on what you would like to hear about. You can always send us messages through the office hours site. With that said, I've seen a few questions pop up in Q&A. Are there any other questions that anyone has? If there are, just add them to the Q&A. We can answer them now live, so feel free to ask questions. Last call for questions. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any more questions for today. Thank you so much for your attendance. I hope this was valuable information for you. We will be here next month on the office hours to show more information around what is available from a backup and recovery solutions portfolio. And again, if you have any suggestions or comments about what you've seen today or in the past, or you would like to see something new or different, please post it to us out on our office hours website. We'll answer or provide topics for the future. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day and enjoy your weekend.